Natural. After hours of watching her phone battery drain to 1%, Shanice was shocked to finally see a bar of signal.
911, what's your emergency?
Was all she heard before her phone died, leaving her tiny cell as dim as her hope for survival. "You'll feel it in no time," the dealer laughed as smoke filled Tormund's lungs. Tormund tried tearing his lips from the car's tailpipe, but the glue was too strong. Miriam cried out when the door shut on her arm. The elevator suddenly went up, the pain worse than anything she could have imagined. Noah pulled on his new outfit, finding the fit to be skin-tight. The woman's body had been a few sizes smaller than his, but he knew her skin would stretch out if he kept wearing it. It took many dozens of faint cries for help from the attic for Nadia to swallow her fear and investigate. The only thing up there were those creepy wax figures Daddy was always working on. Rudy smashed the phone on the concrete, determined not to be tracked by the authorities. He thanked the Lord for reminding him to check his new pet's pockets before loading her limp body into his trunk. In Walter's line of work, the Mastercraft T190X belt sander was a game changer. Skinning his victims had never been more efficient. As the roller coaster paused dramatically at the peak of the steep drop, Lachlan noticed the woman beside him repeatedly making the sign of the cross. He laughed to himself, finding the gesture extreme until he too noticed the broken rail. Andre glazed the skewered pig with honey, watching the skin get golden and crispy as it slowly rotated over the fire. "Ah crap," he cursed when he noticed he'd forgotten to remove the pig's wristwatch. Jack's friends warned him about messing with the dark web, but he had ordered that mystery box anyway. He removed photo after photo of himself sleeping on different nights from the box, but the terror really set in when he saw the blood sample. The tears began streaming down Mary Jo's face the moment she was named Miss Earth. She never even wanted to be in the pageant, and now she was about to be preserved in amber for future generations to admire. Alonzo had been looking forward to dressing his new mannequin in all his designs. Getting the clothes on proved incredibly frustrating, the mannequin crying and struggling all the while. "I'm gay." Benjamin finally stuttered into the microphone, and the crowd erupted into cheers. The admission was the ringleader's cue to set light to the pyre at Benjamin's feet. Halima remained conscious for the entirety of the crash, from the moment of impact to when the car finally came to rest upon its roof. She was certain that God had protected her until the fire started and her seatbelt refused to unbuckle. "What beautiful skin you have," the producer said as he checked the cameras, ensuring Magda's naked body was in frame from every angle. Her friends had prepared her for the dangers of the adult film industry, but Magda still screamed when the producer whipped out his knife. Francis turned page after page of his family album, pleased at just how many photos he had collected. "Look, you get your own fresh page." When Robin noticed how pronounced the dog's ribs were, he couldn't fault them for eating their dinner so voraciously. It was their cruel owner Robin blamed for every hunk of flesh being torn from his body. Amy's husband heckled her through half a dozen gutter balls, but she eventually managed to send the bowling ball perfectly down the middle. "You crazy bitch!" Gus screamed from the end of the lane, unable to move as the ball sped right towards his face. "I'm going to do everything I can," the surgeon promised Layla from her son's bedside. "Leave my little boy alone," Layla screamed, helpless to do anything but watch as the sadistic bastard make good on his promise. "Please, it's all I have," Ralph sobbed into his webcam, just a few $100s short of the ransom. He watched helplessly as the hooded figures emailed his porn history to everyone he knew. Wesley stared at his bleeding wrist, strangely unable to feel the pain. He backed away slowly from the table, the circular saw still flinging red sawdust at full speed next to his hand. Dwayne had been walking on pins and needles since he woke up. He could see the light at the end of the tunnel he was trapped in, but his feet were too wounded to continue his escape standing. "F***ing speed bump," Judd cursed, glancing in the rearview mirror. He pulled a U-turn, annoyed that the man he'd just run over was still moving. Stacy wasn't quite smiling ear to ear, but it sure felt like it. The stranger's fingers were firmly hooked into either side of her mouth, stretching her face into an emotion she was far from feeling. Whatever jungle insect was buzzing around in the dark of Rosalie's tent finally stung her, the pain prompting a reflexive slap that crushed it dead against her forehead. She awoke the next morning to an itch more intense than she'd ever felt, the first hard scratch of which exposed skull and filled the tent with a stench like rotting meat. Since the night she was abducted, Wendy had been probed, tested and experimented upon. "The subject is suitable for breeding," said the sweet old man Wendy had assumed was safe to hitchhike with. Moments after the elevator screeched to a halt between floors, Janice was mashing the emergency call button and shrieking for help. "Don't you worry, young lady," came a calm voice from the speaker before adding, "You're exactly where I want you. Your father decided to leave us, so now he's gone," Azumi's mother once explained over dinner. Only recently had Azumi begun wondering why there had been so few tears at the table, and so many hairs in her food. The guy at the hardware store was right, the drain cleaner was as strong and corrosive as promised. It only took Corbin 3 big gulps to achieve the desired effect. "I'll need to take your fingerprints," the officer said as he cuffed Ed. When Ed felt the skin being flayed from his left index fingertip, the horrible realization that the man wasn't a cop finally set in. Amos beamed with pride, his warehouse brimming with vegetables ready for harvest. Each catatonic body's worth of organs would sell for at least $250,000 on the black market. Aldo had never written a more personal letter in his life, his head swimming with thoughts of his future wife reading it. He battled dizziness that grew with every impassioned word he wrote, determined that ink was far less romantic than his own blood. Caitlin zipped up the body bag and began pushing it in the mortuary refrigerator. The body kept thrashing, but a swift smack with a hammer took care of that. The attendants massaged a warm sugar and honey scrub all over Gabby's body. She kept begging them to stop, especially after they filled the coffin with insects and closed the lid. "Hail Mary, full of grace." Father Michael started yet again, the nuns tightening Sharon's restraints to keep her from thrashing during the exorcism. Both nuns kept silent, despite knowing the only force in possession of Sharon was fear. Paolo hated living alone, but always found comfort in the knowledge that loneliness couldn't kill him. One night when a handful of half-chewed popcorn lodged in his throat, he realized he hadn't been entirely correct. Dorothy was terrified when she noticed the pale, withered old woman staring at her with cloudy eyes. "Mom, it's just a mirror," the stranger impersonating her daughter insisted, but Dorothy knew better than to trust her. The crocodile burst from the water without warning, grabbing Jed by the leg and twisting with ferocity. He pleaded for his father to save him, but Bubba had no intention of letting his baby go hungry. "This is to keep you away from the nursery," the nurse said as she fastened the last restraint around Monica's ankle. "I'll be looking after your daughter now," the nurse added as she injected a syringe full of air into the IV. Dean squinted, focusing on a single point in the distance. The wall of spikes was full of such points, but Dean could already tell which one would inevitably pierce his right eye. Ali had pulled many pranks on her boyfriend since they'd moved in together, but Jay made her promise long ago that fake blood was off limits. That's how he knew their blood-splattered apartment was not a cruel prank, but an active crime scene. "Guess who?" came the voice in Roxanne's ear, but she couldn't see a thing. Whoever had surprised her by covering her eyes had quickly plunged their thumbs deep into the sockets. Karen's family ran to her moments after she landed her first solo skydive, right on target. They found her surprisingly intact, given the speed at which she'd hit the ground. Yasmin was impressed with the sheer amount her little pincushion could hold. Every pin and needle that pierced Keith's skin hurt worse than the last, now that the endorphins had run out. Tommy struggled to remove his mask, so tightly fastened to his skull that he was forced to use a knife. He just peeled his damn face right off, a blood-spattered bystander later stammered into a reporter's microphone outside the restaurant. Jenna had no idea how the fire started, but she was trapped in the corner of her bedroom with roaring flames between her and the door. The wave of relief that came when the fireman opened the door vanished when he smiled and slowly closed it again. Thea clutched the knife and huddled low in the back seat, trying to stifle her heavy breathing as the stranger inched closer and closer to the car. They opened the door and got in, just like every night since Thea had started watching. Ethan was informed that the amputation was a success, with no risk of infection and a speedy recovery ahead. The surgeon noted on his chart that for the 5th consecutive procedure the subject refused to comment, adding that this time should be the last time that anesthesia was used. Margot thought it was a literal godsend to be found by a priest in such a state, blood and tears flowing freely as she described how the gang of brutes had beaten and used her. "Some can't be saved," the priest lamented, his hammer only now visible in the flickering alley light. Taxidermy had allowed Norm to preserve every pet he'd had since childhood, and he was ever grateful to his father for teaching him the craft. He loved being able to look at Rita, Michiko, Alessa and the rest anytime he wanted, each of them just as beautiful as the day he'd killed them. Blinded by the crashing waves of salt water, Celeste swam for her life, expending every last ounce of strength to get back to shore. Her husband screamed at the top of his lungs, but the ocean was too loud for Celeste to hear. She was swimming away from the beach. "You're free," the warden said, shaking the confused prisoner's hand and nodding his head towards the wide-open steel gates. Dogs snarled in the distance as the warden added, "The hunt begins in 60 seconds. The entire crime scene crew had been called to the house for a huge cleanup job, but Charlotte was the first to arrive. "There isn't a drop of blood in this place," Charlotte thought moments before the landlord plunged the knife into the back of her head. As the camera continued watching into the 5th day without sustenance, John understood whoever was behind all this had no intention of feeding them. He looked at his fellow prisoners with suspicion, wondering if they had also realized their next meal was imprisoned alongside them. This spine-chilling horror stories are also available in audiobook, hardcover and paperback on Amazon and in Goodreads. Make sure to check it out. Links are in the description box below.